Hello and welcome to the TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and coming up now is our roundtable discussion on how telcos are using Kubernetes as an edge platform. Now, although Kubernetes had its origins within the public cloud, Google's to be precise, as a way to orchestrate containers, end users are now using it in a variety of new deployment scenarios, and much of this is due to the large developer ecosystem behind Kubernetes. So what about its use as an edge platform for telcos to help with the move to cloud-native functions, as well as the adoption of open source edge projects? How viable is this approach? Well, let's find out what our guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Neil McRae, Managing Director, Architecture and Technology Strategy and Chief Architect for BT. Ahmed Zaidi, who is Telco Cloud NFV 5G Core Architect at Orange. Rajesh Gadiyar, who is VP and CTO Network Platforms Group at Intel. Hanen Garcia, Global Telco Solutions Manager with Red Hat. And Heather Kirksey, VP Ecosystem and Community for LF Networking. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thank you for taking part in the round table. Now, this time last year, the former CIO of Orange spoke bluntly about the dangers of telcos looking to do their own thing. And he said, and I quote, "You go on Kubernetes, don't reinvent the world. Everyone is going on Kubernetes, so please just go on Kubernetes." So was he right? Ahmed, let's start our discussion with your views first.
Yes, obviously we need to go to Kubernetes, as Kubernetes is here since more than, let's say, 5 years, and let's say, we know a lot of applications that they are working on it. So for me, definitely, yes, we need to go with Kubernetes, and to not go with other things or to rebuild a new orchestrator, let's say. But definitely, yes, we need to go with this.
Thanks, Ahmed. Rajesh, do you agree with the sentiment there? We shouldn't reinvent the world, shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should just take what the Kubernetes community has already developed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Thierry was absolutely right. Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration system of choice for automating cloud application deployment, scaling, and management. But perhaps actually what Thierry was really urging telcos is to not reinvent the wheel, and instead adopt cloud-native approaches and technologies in general. So the last few years, as you know, we've seen telcos embrace NFV, and then the resultant hardware-software disaggregation has delivered a lot of great benefits, such as a software-defined and programmable network infrastructure, and a large, vibrant ecosystem of network application vendors. Now, I'm especially proud of our collaboration with BT and Orange, the original founders of CNFs, and also our collaboration with Heather and team in OPNFV under Linux Foundation Networking. Now, as we look at the next phase in network transformation, it is all about software disaggregation and distributed computing, particularly at the edge. Now, telcos have an opportunity to reuse some of the same technologies and software practices that have been pioneered by the cloud service providers. And Kubernetes, in my mind, is the most important of them all, because in a way, you can think of it as the new cloud operating system. So we at Intel have collaborated with operators to deploy both virtual machines and containers in the same Kubernetes cluster. And we have a number of blueprints that we've been working with in the Linux Foundation Edge community, which makes it easy to deploy both legacy 4G VNFs with the 5G containerized network functions. So in my mind, Kubernetes is now available universally across multiple public clouds. And yes, just go to Kubernetes.
Just go to Kubernetes. Good advice. Heather.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of reiterate that advice, but maybe even frame it a different way, it's like, why would you not? Would anyone right now go write an operating system from scratch? No, so it's not even like, why would you? It's like, why would you not adopt Kubernetes, which, as Rajesh just said, is the cloud operating system. So, you don't build new operating systems from scratch because, first of all, that's not where anyone differentiates anymore. And second of all, you want to build on things so that then you can focus either as an operator or vendor on where your specific and unique value can live.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Neil, just before we get on to more specific issues around the edge, this question of just go on Kubernetes. I guess it also applies to don't fork Kubernetes. Just keep the core Kubernetes.
Yeah, I mean, look, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But I do think what I'd like to see is more input into the whole Kubernetes world from a service provider and pure networking point of view. Kubernetes is a great piece of software, but from there's certain aspects of it in networking that could be better or are a bit clunky. It's the nature of what it is, and I think there's more to do on. I think there's more opportunity to improve it, but improve it is one thing rather than having 16 different flavors of it, which is where I think we went badly wrong with NFV in the end. I think there's also one question which is more around clustering. Kubernetes is great for many things, but clustering, it's probably not its strongest point. And I think are there use cases where clustering and wider scale clustering might require either further development of Kubernetes or alternative platforms. And actually, we worked in the early days of NFV, we worked and kind of experimented with Apache Mythos. And one of the glorious things about that is the clustering in it is really strong. So, if you're building a distributed network and you can build it as one cluster, then there's a lot of advantages of that in the control plane and in the state that you need to manage. So, yeah, I mean, I'm 100%, let's not invent something that we don't need just for the sake of saying it's telco, 100% behind that. But let's not get complacent about what's there. Let's try and take it, improve it, make it better, not just for us, but for the whole community.
Thanks, Neil. I do want to come on to the question of telcos getting more involved in Kubernetes development in a moment, but I just want to focus in on the edge for now. Edge computing needs to be scalable, and the question is, how do you manage a large number of geographically dispersed edge sites easily and efficiently? Neil, if I can come back to you on this one, is a Kubernetes native edge framework the right way forward? I mean, we've seen projects like KubeEdge from CNCF, and I'm sure there's a ton of others there that are all under consideration. But is this the right way forward, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're still at if you think of the evolution of this, we're probably at the egg is cracked and the creature is walking. We've got a lot of evolution to go through and a lot of learning to go through. And I think that distributed and always available part of what we need in telco is an area of improvement that needs work. And look, there are many brilliant things that we're using in our 5G core right now that allows us to wind software down, do upgrades, and do other things that really make really bring out the advantage of Kubernetes. So we can shut down one version of software, spin up another, and migrate customers to it without them even knowing. I mean, that in itself, in telco, we've been trying to do that for 30 years and just haven't delivered it. But in some cases, there's still an interruption of service there. So how do we do more to remove that interruption of service, even though it's minute? And for many applications that you wouldn't know, I happen to run a network that carries emergency services traffic. In that scenario, you just can't have an interruption in the middle of a major incident. So, I wouldn't want to say that it's not good or it's not good enough. What I want to say is how do we make it even better?
Thank you, Neil. Rajesh, is a Kubernetes native edge framework the right way forward for telcos?
Yeah, I think, Neil made some really good points, right? So if you think about KubeEdge, it's an open source edge computing platform built on Kubernetes with cloud native technologies, right? And it provides core infrastructure support for networking, application deployment, and metadata synchronization between cloud and edge. Now, KubeEdge project was created mainly to address use cases for resource constrained edges. So KubeEdge runs a Kubernetes controller in the cloud and worker nodes at the edges. Now, KubeEdge addressed some reliability and robustness problems associated with separating control plane from worker nodes, which is great. But in our experience, KubeEdge also has some scalability challenges that need to be addressed, which are important to discuss as well. So as an example, as you know, CRD controllers normally run in Kubernetes controller nodes, but that's not the only model. They can also run in worker nodes. And if you choose this architecture, the communication and bandwidth requirements go up significantly, especially when there are regular status updates. Now, since WAN bandwidth can be limited and expensive, this can cause significant inefficiency. Now, also, there are assumptions made by some Kubernetes operators and other infrastructure components, such as the Istio service mesh, for example, where both controllers and worker nodes would be in the same LAN. Now, in such instances, deploying components with KubeEdge with a WAN network between controllers and workers can be very challenging. So, in hybrid and multi-cloud environments, telcos need to work with managed Kubernetes clusters, either from public cloud service providers or from newcomers like Equinix. Now, these Kubernetes clusters are self-contained in the sense that both controllers and workers are present. So due to this, I think telcos would prefer that all Kubernetes clusters, edge or otherwise, are somewhat self-contained. Now, scalability of one controller managing multiple worker nodes, especially beyond 256 worker nodes, can be a big challenge as well. So that's why people tend to prefer self-contained edges. So, in this context, when we're talking about KubeEdge, I also want to encourage you to look at two open source projects that are related. One is called ODIM, Open Distributed Infrastructure Management, where we are collaborating with HPE and also Linux Foundation to automate infrastructure provisioning and management across edge locations. And also take a look at MCO, Edge and Multi-Cluster Orchestration, where we are collaborating with Orange and other partners for deploying applications across multiple edge and cloud clusters.
Thanks, Rajesh. We'll put some links to those projects in the text description below this video, so we can our viewers can link straight to those projects. Heather, I know you wanted to come in on this one, but let me link in to the next question as well, because they are very closely aligned. And that was a survey I was reading early this year from CNCF, stated that 3/4 of its community already uses Kubernetes for its edge application. So, given that there's already a lot of standards for Kubernetes APIs and the focus on extensibility, Kubernetes as the basis for edge compute makes the platform easier to work with, doesn't it? And surely this all makes sense.
Yes. So I think it does. And, sort of tying that question into this one, I think that sometimes we over-rotate sort of on Kubernetes because Kubernetes is the core. But as Rajesh was just saying, right, there are additional projects and additional pieces of your platform that some of which are quite geared towards telcos, going back to what Neil was saying around networking, there are network plugins which are more or less, geared towards certain types of telecom networking functionality. So, the big thing is as you are piecing together what the full landscape of your technology is, I don't think Kubernetes is in doubt. It's all the other things that you layer around it for certain types of use cases, and then look at sort of the integration piece, because you mentioned APIs, but, there's a lot of work to bring, multiple open source projects together to build out, say, a full and complete 5G network, and, we're doing some experiments with that, with actually many of the people here on this call, around things like super blueprints, which is, assume that Kubernetes is there, and because it is widespread, because it is well known, because it is modular, and because it has well-defined APIs, then you start figuring out all of the pieces that you want to bolt together for what the full network platform infrastructure looks like in various places within the network and within your stack. And so it's that, Kubernetes is great. It's Kubernetes plus, plus, plus for certain use cases for 5G that really then builds and creates your network.
Thanks, Heather. And Neil, you wanted to add a point there?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly couldn't agree more with that. And in fact, one of the things we learned as we started to build cloud native apps was we probably hadn't spent enough time on that tool chain, tool set, and all the kind of capability that you need around the infrastructure. And actually that became a bottleneck for us. And we kind of had to step back and do a lot more work on that. And actually we've, in our architecture, we actually have a kind of a tool site as one of the key pieces of that architecture where we develop, store, and test and build tools that support around all of this, NFVI or cloud native infrastructure, because it's very easy to build something and get it up and running. It's another thing to run it, maintain it, and manage it. And I think if you're going off on this journey, I'd probably say 60 or 70% of your time is more about the tooling than it is about the actual core part of the platform.
Thank you, Neil. Hanen, you're nodding there. We haven't heard from you in the discussion yet. Any thoughts about the use of Kubernetes as making edge compute an easier platform to work with?
I think, and I hearing, and I kind of agree with Ahmed was saying and Neil was saying as well, around Kubernetes being ready for telco, and I couldn't agree more on do not try to fork it as the telco industry used to do. The reality is that Kubernetes is, as Heather was mentioning, right, is the operating system for the cloud. And independently, we are looking at edge, or we are looking at radio access network or fixed access network or the core. There is no reason today not to bring any kind of network functions directly on Kubernetes. And most of the telco operators that are today running into or thinking about how they're going to be deploying 5G, or they are actually deploying 5G, are already adopting Kubernetes for that. It's a de facto platform for this kind of workload. So when they're thinking about how they're going to modernize the access network, independently if it's a radio, independently of a fixed network, they have to think about the edge infrastructure they're going to realize, and they're going to need on those layers on the network. And Kubernetes comes as a de facto platform as well, once again. I couldn't say more about the telcos, how they will be going further standardizing on a Kubernetes platform. But today, most of the interaction I have with customers and the interaction we have with other partners is that all those workloads are coming natively to run in a telco cloud, to be cloud native. And by the way, it's going to be all running on Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Hanen. And Ahmed, let's come back to you for some thoughts from yourself.
Yes, exactly. If I fully agree with what all the colleagues are saying, and also it will, using Kubernetes also help us also regarding all CI/CD also, because as we mentioned previously, yes, we are losing a lot of time, for example, from the testing, building tools, and with Kubernetes, it helps us a lot to have, let's say, from cloud native solution.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now, there's a massive community around Kubernetes. It's been described as its own ecosystem. There's huge ongoing development, but just how involved are telcos? Neil, you brought this up earlier in the conversation that you'd like to see them more involved in Kubernetes development. Heather, you've probably got more first-hand experience than anyone else here on this, the community aspects of open source work. Are telcos contributors, or are they still simply, unfortunately, just users?
Well, first of all, I would not say simply or unfortunately for being a user of new and innovative technology. But yes, no, telcos are contributing, and in a variety of ways. So, going back to deployment, right? Kubernetes is a great platform, but there are ways in which you can deploy it. There are configurations, there are options. And so, within Aniket, for example, it's, taking core Kubernetes and, related, CNCF projects and figuring out, what are the choices that we want to constrain for how we want to globally deploy Kubernetes, and then work on things like compliance and interoperability, especially for telecom-oriented workloads. Yeah, there's work going on in CNCF, in this CNF work group. There's also a lot of work going on within Aniket around this, compliance programs that we're working on with Aniket Assured. And so, there's a lot of work that we're doing, which is we're not forking, we're not making different decisions. We're looking at what's available and making intentional choices for, how to deploy it, how to make use of it, how to ensure interop, those things that feel very close to us in telco, right? Like, compliance, interoperability, making sure that performance works. And so that's a lot of what Aniket does, which is, we understand that this is, where we start. There's no question about that. But then how do we make the best use of it for the communications ecosystem? And so that's where things like compliance programs come in. That's also, to go back to related types of development. I mentioned, network plugins, that's a very active place. It's not Kubernetes core, but it is where Kubernetes core touches networking. And, there's a whole array of projects that different folks from our ecosystem, are testing out and contributing to, from both the vendors in our ecosystem to the operators in our ecosystem. And so I think that, to define contribution to Kubernetes or cloud native only means that you're contributing to mainstream core, Kubernetes code, I think misses the entire panoply of ways that our end users are more than passive consumers. In fact, they are very intentional, very active, and very driven consumers of how to leverage Kubernetes and what to build around it. And I think that is, actually pretty extraordinary, because it requires both technical knowledge as well as decision making and, some imagination to fill in the gaps. And, I think sometimes it's always like, what is telecom doing wrong? And it could be, give us a pat on the head for what we're doing right.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Very, very insightful. And you're absolutely right. The very important first step for a telco is to actually use the technology and adopt it, and then let's see if they want to get involved. Hanen, you wanted to come in on this topic as well.
Yeah, well, I usually get this from Heather, but I'm going to put it out there. There is a broad scope to what contribution means. And contribution doesn't only mean go and provide code. Contribution means as well, help us understand what are the needs for those specific workloads, what are the challenges you're having with the platform, what is the challenge we're having with a specific piece of the technology. Neil was mentioning about networking. There is a lot of progress we have done on networking, and there is still a lot of progress to do on networking as well. And I understand pretty well, I see that every day. And we're working with partners like Intel as well on trying to make the most progress we can to try to get the most we can, the most performance we can out of the hardware, okay? But as well providing an abstraction toward the workloads that are going to be being executing on that Kubernetes platform. And there is a lot of projects out there. And there is a lot, and this is sometimes a little bit difficult to understand, and I think Heather was trying to explain that as well, is that Kubernetes is like your operating system, and then you have packages on top of that operating system. And those are different projects out there in the CNCF community that are tackling specific problems that you might have and will help you with a challenge that you might have today, or maybe a challenge you're going to have tomorrow when you realize or you're going to hit that roadblock. But there is as well a lot of commercial opportunities out there as well. So there is a whole ecosystem of partners working and contributing into those projects, and as well having the commercial products out of it. So there is a whole ecosystem. Contribution is not only about providing code, contribution is as well about helping us understand what the challenge you have so that we can make progress on the platform and all those projects at the CNCF.
Thanks, Hanen. And Rajesh, plenty of areas where telcos can contribute. And as we've heard, that term contribution means many things.
Yeah, I think Hanen and Heather actually really made some good points, right? And I'm definitely seeing the larger telco ecosystem beginning to contribute to Kubernetes. But let me actually tell you a few specifics about where I've actually seen, for example, even Intel, right? Like the group that I work in at Intel, we do a lot of work and collaborate closely with the telcos. And we realized the potential of Kubernetes for telco applications back in 2018. And we all know that Kubernetes is good for deploying IT applications in the cloud. At Intel, we realized that Kubernetes can be extended to support telco workloads, but there is actually a few things that we need to do to enhance Kubernetes, particularly from a networking, quality of service, and associated capabilities, right? So as part of that, we have led many Kubernetes extensions needed for telcos. So as an example, we contributed to Multus, right, to broker multiple container network interfaces. We also contributed to SRIOV CNI, right, which is so important to allow the container network functions to access networks directly, bypassing the Linux kernel. This is so important from a performance perspective, so that we can deliver the packet processing container network functions, such as in the RAN, right, the RAN DU, CUUP, the user plane functions. How do we actually deliver performance that is required for these applications in the Kubernetes environment, right? So we've actually been focused on improving the capabilities in the CNI, like the SRIOV CNI that I talked about. We've also contributed to allow multiple secondary interfaces required for CNFs to support separate management and data interfaces. We've looked at things like Kubernetes extensions and operators that expose accelerators. We know that support for heterogeneous compute is going to be so important for edge, right? And accelerators for baseband acceleration, such as with our N3000 and AC100 devices for VLAN acceleration. That's another example of where we've contributed to Kubernetes and Kubernetes extensions. Now, we also realized that many telco infrastructures run on IPv6, and we're also working to make Kubernetes and telco extensions work on IPv6 in IPv6 environments. So from my perspective, we are beginning to see some great contributions for the extended telco ecosystem into Kubernetes already.
Thank you, Rajesh. I've got one quick final question I'd like to put to you, and that is, will the use of Kubernetes give telcos cause to rethink their 5G edge architectures? You know, is there time to plan for a different strategy, perhaps one that's more cloud native and less telecoms SDO based, or have we passed beyond that point now? Hanen, can I get your views on this one? Could Kubernetes reshape the 5G edge?
Absolutely. And the answer to do the telco need to rethink the 5G edge strategy architectures? Yes. Do they have to plan a better and include Kubernetes? Yes. Have we passed this point? Yes. Operators are already deploying Kubernetes on the access networks. Operators are deploying already Kubernetes on the core networks, and operators are deploying Kubernetes on the edge as well, so that they will have the capabilities, the flexibility to provide edge services on 5G. And we are looking as well how the other networks, like the fixed access network as well, is transforming as well on the access side. And we'll see opportunities for them as well to adopt today Kubernetes for that part as well.
Thank you, Hanen. Any of our other guests want to contribute? That's a final chance to contribute to the 5G Edge question.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in really quick here, right? So in my opinion, I think telcos have already realized the virtues of cloud native deployments, the flexibility that's afforded by Kubernetes and its vast ecosystem. So we see that many telcos are already beginning to deploy 5G and MEC using Kubernetes. And somewhat surprisingly to me, telcos are successfully adopting enterprise-like model for the lifecycle management of network functions. I also see a good trend. Telcos are no longer insisting on ETSI and TOSCA standards in describing network services and workloads. They seem to be very happy with describing workloads and services with the help charts as an example. So telcos seem to be even considering GitOps model that is popular for IT applications to automate deployments of network functions with a CI/CD approach. So I think it's fabulous. I think we're making great progress.
Thank you, Rajesh. And Neil, will Kubernetes give telcos cause to reshape, if not rethink, their 5G edge strategies?
Well, I think we were lucky in that we deployed standalone and non-standalone, and I think as we move towards standalone, we're to some extent building the true 5G core later than when 5G's been available, and I think that has been a very valuable outcome that to some extent we were lucky on, and this was one of my big concerns when the 5G standards dictated what the underlying infrastructure should be. That made me very nervous because the underlying infrastructure moves at a pace that's quicker typically than the 5G network itself moves, and I think we've probably learned something over the last few years that actually is dictating what the underlying infrastructure should be the right thing for 3GPP and GSMA to be doing. I still argue that it isn't. I just want to build on one point though. I think to move away from model-based solutions for telecommunications is something to be done with great care, particularly when you have requirements around survivability, security, sustainability, and availability, where if you're not following a model-based direction, it's quite difficult to be sure that you've delivered what you wanted to deliver in your use case or your solution. So are there applications that you can take an IT approach to that you can run in the edge? Of course there are. For the 5G core or the underlying infrastructure, I'd be very cautious about that, particularly if you then want to try and use networking functions much more as a kind of API call. Our move to model-based architectures has accelerated things in telco massively, and I'd be nervous to move away from that. But overall, I think we got lucky on the standalone non-standalone to standalone. But I agree, everyone is now working for to deploy a cloud-native solution, and actually, I think what we're seeing, or certainly what I'm seeing, is some of the supporting tools around the 5G core probably aren't as cloud native as they need to be, and some vendors are having to catch up, and actually that's making it a bit of a headache for operators, because some core parts of 5G are cloud native, and some of the supporting tools or supporting capabilities aren't so cloud native, and it makes that a headache for us to integrate. And you've got to build things in a probably more clunky way than you would like for it to be in a purer architecture. But overall, if you're not working on a Kubernetes-based 5G core, then you're working on the wrong thing probably.
Great point to finish with, Neil. Thank you very much for that. And with that, we do have to draw our discussion to a close. Thank you all so much for participating and sharing your views and opinions. Now, if you're watching this on day 2 of our TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco, then don't forget, please send us any questions you have on this subject, and we'll try and answer them in our live after show program later today. And please take part in our online poll. You can find it below this video player window next to the Q&A app. All of this year's Summit programs are available to view online here at TelecomTV, and we'll be back later with the after show. Until then, thanks for watching and goodbye.